Hello there. For this video, I thought it might be an interesting time to revisit the Bigme Galy. This is the only device that I'm aware of that was ever released with the technology known as Gallery 3. And it turned out not to be a particularly successful technology as was implemented in a consumer electronic device like the Galy. And there's a lot of reasons for this. We're actually going to kind of show some of those reasons off during the course of the video. My focus is going to be a little bit more on the Galy itself. I've just recently done a video on Gallery 3 talking about all the reasons why it just doesn't make it as a technology. So we won't delve as deep into that on this video, although of course I'll reference some of those points here as well. But the idea basically is going over the journey that I've gone through with the Galy, what my original thinking was, and where my mind's at now with this particular device. It's kind of a fascinating device and kind of a train wreck kind of a sense. So I thought it was worth, revisiting, taking a look, testing its battery, and just giving it a last go through before maybe it's relegated to the drawer forever. We'll see. Maybe future firmware updates will kind of reignite this device, but I kind of doubt it at this point. Anyway, before we get into any of the details of that, let's just go over some of the basics. So I mentioned this device is running Gallery 3. So what is Gallery 3? Well, Gallery 3 is basically an e-ink technology. It was originally developed for signage, that's the word gallery, but it was ported over on its third iteration to consumer electronic devices, although the Galy currently is the only one that I'm aware of to actually have leveraged the technology. But that wasn't the plan from e-ink. They really wanted Gallery 3 to be a significant mover in the marketplace. It just didn't turn out to happen that way. It originally came out for about $700, which is a pretty steep price for what effectively is a glorified e-reader. You can buy a really nice, very responsive e-reader for $100, a fraction of the price. So just handling that well wasn't enough to make it a particularly useful device. It does sell for $670 now, so it's taken a little bit of a price cut. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is a functional device at all. I think this is basically a tech demo more than anything. And a lot of the flaws, I think, kind of bear that out. It just has that feeling of not being fully baked. And some of that is perhaps Bigme's fault. But I think the blame ultimately lies on the technology itself. Otherwise, we would have seen more Gallery 3 devices out there in the wild, and we don't. So I give Bigme a bit of a pass on this one. In fact, I am appreciative, I suppose, ultimately, that they released this device at all. It's been, albeit an expensive exercise, an interesting one nonetheless. So I've definitely kind of enjoyed reviewing it, but that's kind of the extent of it. I certainly can't recommend this to anybody. But anyway, just kind of going through the specifications just to round out this device. It does have 50,000 colors and a 300 DPI. That's what's inherent with a Gallery 3 screen. It's an 8-inch device. A lot of times when we use the phrase 8 inches in the e-ink world, we actually mean 7.8, but this is actually a true 8-inch device. It has 6 gigabytes of RAM. It features a 2.3 gigahertz chip with 8 cores, 128 gigabytes of storage. They really did pack a lot of specs into this device, and a 3,000 milliamp hour battery. So that's basically the specifications of this thing. I want to talk a little bit before I get into some demonstrations. I want to talk about the journey I've had with this device. When I first bought it, and it was almost a year ago, Kickstarter, there was a Kickstarter campaign around this Galy, and the first ones I think came to a select few folks, maybe December and January, and then a few more were released, and then became available to the public. And I want to say it was April or May when I received mine, as I was not part of that campaign. My initial reaction was, well, this thing's really rough around the edges, but it had hope, and I spent a lot of time kind of playing with it, testing out different aspects of the device. And what I ultimately landed is it's serviceable as an e-reader. I mean, it does handle that, adequately. But keep in mind, e-reading is one of the easiest things for e-ink to do. And when you're left with a $700 e-reader, when you can get a $100 e-reader, that's not a great value. And that's ultimately where I landed. But I did spend a lot of time really optimistically reviewing this device. And I think a big reason for that is just before I'd purchased this device, I'd purchased the InkNote Color Plus, which is a device that was Kaleido 3 and I think stands the test of time much better than the Galy. And there were a number of firmware updates for that device, even early on, but certainly throughout the year, that improved it. And so the thought process was that this device, especially being new technology, would also be subject to significant firmware updates that would hopefully kind of start to patch together some of these issues that are popping up. And it is true, there were firmware updates for the Galy, and probably most significant of which tried to cut into some of the difficulty around the battery life of the device. But outside of that, there really wasn't much they could do with the device, and unfortunately, most of the firmware updates just weren't significant enough to make a difference. So ultimately, the Galy kind of hit a dead end, and it hasn't really had much of an update since late last year. Okay, so that's basically my background. I started off kind of optimistic, reality kind of sunk in, and really the story hasn't changed in a while. So what I thought we would do is we'd go through a couple little demonstrations. I'll walk you through these and show you, some of the areas where it's pretty clear, how the system bogs down, how it's not particularly responsive. And keep in mind, in a number of these video clips, I've actually edited them for brevity. But in many clips, I would tap on something multiple times, or something would pop up when I didn't expect it, because it's such a latent response to something I had tapped on a while earlier. So those were cut out. So you're just going to see the actual performance, but it's not nearly as smooth as the video suggests, and the video, of course, is going to show a not so smooth experience. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these video clips and get a sense of how the Galy acts in real life. Okay, in this first demonstration, we're going to take a look at how the Galy handles different refresh modes. And we'll start with HD, which is the high definition mode. It's the mode where the colors and the detail are supposed to pop. But it's also the mode where the responsiveness of the screen drops pretty significantly. And you can see the huge delay in going over to the second page, now to the first page, and that responsiveness in action. It is very sluggish. So let's go ahead then and move into the other mode, which is extreme. And this is going to be much more responsive, still a little bit sluggish versus what we're used to with, Kaleido or with Carta, but a little more reasonable in this case. And then the final mode we're going to take a look at here is in black and white. And the odd thing about this, once we get to it, is that black and white doesn't actually look black and white. It carries a little bit of the history of the color in the image. So it's a little more grayscale, but not completely. But it is also responsive. It's probably about as responsive as extreme in my mode. Here we are just trying to refresh the screen. It's getting a little stuck. And there we're back. And that's basically what the refresh modes look like. Okay, sticking to the theme of refresh modes, we're going to go into Kobo books here. And we'll go ahead and look at those different refresh modes and how those affect page turning. And we'll start off with HD mode in a second here. So picking it from the e-ink center. And there we are in HD mode. And then notice the amount of time between when I tap the screen and when the page actually turns. So we'll clear the screen, get it ready to go. Okay, and here we go. Look at that delay. Tap. And then the screen finally changes. Almost excruciating. I would argue this is pretty much unacceptable for a book. Let's go ahead and go into extreme mode then and see how that performs. And black and white would perform similarly, so we're just going to do extreme mode here. So tap, okay, tap. That took a bit. Let's do tap, tap. So not great, but much more reasonable, much closer to what you would expect, if not a step behind what you would normally get from an e-reader. So the responsiveness of the device is really sluggish. I mean, you're just confronted with that. Even in the extreme mode that has the most reasonable page turns and switch of pages on apps, you still notice it, and it's just something you can never get away from in the Gallery 3 technology. Okay, those are examples of Gallery 3 in an area where it actually shines the best, which is going from page to page. When you start moving into the realm of scrolling, then it gets to be really significant in terms of the drawbacks. And so we're going to take a look at that here by looking at this application called Google News. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and click on Google News, let that launch. And this is all in extreme mode, which, makes it at least feasible. This would be much worse in HD mode. But you can see how choppy that is. It's functional, but you definitely have no sense of smoothness in the scrolling whatsoever. We're going to go ahead and click on this article and see how it loads and how it scrolls within the article. So we'll get more of a text scroll once we get past the lead image, although there are going to be ads in the article. Let's go and clear that out. You're just waiting. Every moment is, you're just waiting for the system to catch up with what you're trying to do. Do a little bit more scrolling. It's kind of hard to keep your place as well as you're scrolling because it's such an unsmooth experience. You don't know if you've jumped too far ahead or you have to reorient yourself onto the page. So definitely a very suboptimal experience, and this is a pretty basic thing for an e-ink device to do nowadays. So in addition to kind of the strangeness and the sluggishness of the experience of either scrolling or even just going from page to page, when you went into the writing app, there were all sorts of unique experiences there as well. And of course, I mean that euphemistically. So why don't we go ahead and go to the video, and we'll start off by looking at just the strange behavior of the different colors that you can use in the note-taking app. So here we are, and I've already written, hello there in different colors. And what you're noticing, of course, the colors on the left are the ones that have been fully rendered. As we draw them out, not only does it look odd to draw them, but then you'll notice that they'll go through a change once the screen refreshes, if it ever refreshes. And in some cases, the swipe gestures were sluggish. In some cases, they were effective. So here we go with... So you can see that odd line effect there. And it looks purple, but when it refreshes, it becomes much more pink. So we'll go ahead and head over to blue, see what that looks like. Okay, not bad. It looks a little lighter now, but when we refresh it, it becomes darker. So very odd behavior, again, both in the writing and also the eventual rendering of the colors. Black is the one color that's very normal. It pretty much writes with no lag, no noticeable artifacts or effects, and it pretty much is the color that it is. Okay, for our last demonstration here with the Galy device, we're going to just take a look at a little bit of ghosting within the note-taking app. There's ghosting everywhere. And this isn't even the most prominent form of ghosting. I've seen much worse. But let's go ahead and take a quick look and see kind of how that plays out. Okay, so first thing I want to notice is you look at the template, you notice that the lines all have different shades. And that's basically something that the original Bigme had, but they have fixed on a subsequent firmware update. They didn't fix that here. So all the templates have these odd line shadings. Okay, now that I've drawn in, let's go ahead and switch pages, and then you can start to see some ghosting. In fact, if you notice, we still have ghosting from a previous image. So you can see some of the white outline of writing, and then down below you can see an image that actually lasted a number of scenes ago. I've actually had it where I did a writing exercise where I've written on the page and flip that page over, and you see the ghosting of all the writing that had come before, almost as if the ink had bled through the page onto the next page. Pretty terrible ghosting. Just another nail in the coffin for the Galy and for Gallery 3. But we're going to close out with looking at the battery testing we did on this device. And I was actually surprised in some ways that the device did a little bit better than I thought it would. I should point out, though, that we've engaged in this mode called Super Power Save mode. And that's assuredly helping to keep the battery from degrading at the rate it did when I originally got the device. But even with that in place, and that mode was selected for all the testing that I did, the results are still, well, there's definitely mixed. Let's take a look at those results now. Okay, let's take a look at the battery life of the Bigme Galy using those general categories I've used for other reviews. We'll start off with the standby screen off drain, and this is how much the battery drains per hour when the device is in kind of a readiness mode, where you press the power button, and in most cases it takes 1 or 2 seconds for the device to come on, and then you can start engaging with it. In this particular case, because of its special power saving mode, it takes actually like 5 to 7 seconds, but still pretty close to the functionality of the other devices. And the Galy came in at 0.27, which is toward the higher end of these other devices. Then you look at the standby screen on time, and this is the case when the screen is on, you can just start interacting with it at any point in time. And in this particular category, the Galy had a 2.4%, which is on the higher range, but not unheard of. Then when it comes to Wi-Fi, this is basically the screen's on, and then Wi-Fi is on as well, although not active, just not actively downloading or what have you. It's just on in the background, and for that, there was a 5.4% drain. So the Galy didn't set records in any of these categories in terms of battery drain, but it is toward the higher end on each category. That takes us to front lighting, and as usual, I am measuring front lighting with full cold and front lighting with half cold. When I do tests on warm lighting, the results are pretty much the same. So as usual, the color temperature does not seem to have a material impact on the battery drain. I just happen to focus on cold lighting. And full cold comes in at 4.4%. So actually, in this case, it fares a lot better than the other categories, and it's much more middle of the pack. Half lighting, however, is relatively high. It's not the highest of the devices on this list, but it's pretty close. So not sure why the Galy outperforms on full cold lighting, but unlike the other areas we've measured so far, it actually did respectable there. We'll close out by looking at the type of drain. I read a Kobo novel, or actually nonfiction in this case, and the battery drain related to that was 5.9%, definitely on the higher end, consistent with most of our other observations. But then we got into the doozy, the continuous note-taking, and as a reminder, this is a situation where I basically start the clock and I write, and I don't stop writing until about 10 minutes in, and then we keep writing until the battery indicator changes. So it's at least 10 minutes. Some of these tests goes up to 20. This one, though, was quite quick because the drain was so bad. It was 41.6% battery drain. Holy moly. Haven't seen anything even remotely like that. It just, at this rate, you can do continuous writing for a little over 2 hours, and that's about it. Now, to be fair, continuous note-taking is a very kind of artificial, very intense type of a note-taking activity. So it's not meant to measure the true length of time you're actually taking notes, because you have pauses and what have you. But the important thing here is how much this number is worse than all the others. It's really the relative scores that are most important in general, but certainly that's the case here as well. Quite an ending, but even without this really bad result in the note-taking category, it did not do well overall. Another problem with the Gallery 3 technology, at least as it was implemented in the Galy. I think one of the reasons why I find myself continually coming back to the Galy, even though I know it's not a particularly good device, as we've definitely demonstrated in this video, is because, where does e-ink go with color? Given that Kaleido has these inherent limitations in terms of color accuracy through only 4,000 colors, through the density of the color, which is at 150. I mean, it's possible these things might improve with future iterations, but you just get the feeling like Kaleido's getting pretty close to as far as it can go. The underlying carded technology that's about to release is going to have a quicker response time versus the previous, and that may eventually translate into Kaleido in terms of how videos play and might make animations even smoother. But that's not the core problem with Kaleido. It really is the color accuracy and the pixel density. And so right now, Gallery was the only answer to that. So is it possible that Gallery devices will eventually overcome some of these technical limitations? I obviously don't know that question, but that's kind of what I'm looking for as I'm looking at this device. Like, what can it do better than it can finally start to be a challenger in the marketplace and to challenge Kaleido 3? And it's obvious it really does come down to that responsiveness. The responsiveness is everything with this technology, at least in terms of how it's holding it back. It's in terms of just going from page to page in a book, or from screen to screen in the user interface, or take an app that's a little more demanding like Google News. I mean, that is just unacceptable as it's currently construed, and Gallery 3 has to overcome that. And it seems pretty obvious that this iteration of Gallery simply can't do that. And then the question becomes, can the next iteration handle that? If the next iteration cannot handle significantly improved response times, then maybe this particular technology is a dead end, and we just don't know. Hopefully we'll find out in the next year or so, as they work on the technology and eventually announce whatever it is the next thing they're going to release. But the question remains in my mind, can this this 4-color technology eventually become something that becomes mainstream in e-ink devices? You can see elements, just little bits of that in terms of some of the colors that are available on this Galy device. It does look kind of nice. It has a lighter screen, doesn't suffer from the darker screen that Kaleido 3 has. And you can make out a lot of the colors of the icons. They almost pop just a little bit. I wouldn't say they pop like an LCD or even remotely close, but relative to Kaleido, they pop more. So you just see little kernels of promise, but it just feels like such a chasm between where this technology is now and where it's going to go, that every time I come back and I revisit this thing and I ask myself, could I imagine this bridging this gap? It's really hard right now. It's really hard to imagine Gallery being anything other than a technology for signage. And I certainly hope to be proven wrong about that, no doubt about that. But right now, I just don't see it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane as I did, looking at the past to maybe get a sense of the future. If you have any questions, please put that in the comments. Otherwise, I will see you next time.